Welcome, Bjarne Mikkelsen, the man with the incredible handshake. People have talked about Bill Clinton's handshake. When I first received your handshake, that was the closest, from what I've understood, of the power of Bill Clinton's handshake.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
A career in so many areas of travel. We're going to touch on air traffic control in Kenya in the 1970s, the tourism business opening up of Russia. There's so many things. We'll try to cover a few of them, starting with Hans Christian Andersen. His motto, you say, is "To travel is to live."
Amen.
And thinking of that, the story, I mean, the stories and images that he created and captured is so much of what makes travel magical. And you had this incredible start, Danish Air Force, and then you take a job, air traffic control in Nairobi, Kenya, and you decide to drive there. Tell us about that decision and that incredible trip. This is early 1970s. No GPS, not many roads where you're headed.
There we go. That is the vehicle. And some of you might very well recognize the 2CV, the Churchill, and I'm sure a lot of people do. That was a car that I converted to a little mini camper and took off before Christmas of '71, ended up in Nairobi in April of '72 with the hopes of getting a air traffic control contract, which did happen in June, so it took a while to get the bureaucrats to pull it off. But yes, 2 years in Kenya was unbelievable, but to get there was even more unbelievable. A lot of people, of course, said, "There's no way you're not going to end up there alive," but it wasn't without danger, but it was one of the adventures that I always wanted to do.
Wasn't without danger sounds understatement. So, but these. How about for this? For those of us that have never driven on sand, what do we need to do to make it? There's some logistics of this before we even talk about the people you encountered, the conditions.
You deflate your tires first of all to get better traction. You, instead of 30, you were down to maybe 24 psi in your tires. And then, of course, we brought all kinds of spare parts, which, thank God, I never needed. Lots of provisioning. And the biggest challenge, two actually was the Sahara Desert, and the other one was Zaire, the former Belgium Congo, where the two words road maintenance are not part of their vocabulary. Their roads are part of the worst roads I've ever seen anywhere. Sahara, nothing but sand, no blacktop, no asphalt, and a distance between two gas stations equivalent to New York to Chicago.
You're not even sure that there's going to be a gas station at any of these points, or that they would have gas, I would think. Yeah?
That's true too. Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty explosive vehicle, if you will, with a lot of gas on board. So it went well. It's probably one of the biggest and most exciting experiences ever to be out in the middle of the Sahara and at midnight having a sky that is clearer than you will ever see it anywhere. Mm-hmm. The stars were just unbelievable. Nice and warm, a mild breeze, and nobody around you. Except a couple of times when you get stuck in the sand and they're shoveling away, and as you throw the sand away from the car and the sand lands on 2 feet, 2 feet that you had no idea who belonged to, because there were not be any people around. That is one of the incredible things about the Sahara. Uh, there are people there. Where do they live? What do they do? No idea. But extremely helpful. Never had a problem with anybody. And of course, one of the greatest experiences were when I was refueling the car, emptying the jerry can into the car, and these 3 black columns are slowly but surely getting bigger and bigger and approaching me. So what could this possibly be? Must be some animals, some people, whatever. It turned out to be 3 beautiful women from the Tuaregs. And for the ones of you who know a little bit about the Blue people in the Sahara, they are they are a mix of Arab and Negroid. Interesting features. And these 3 ladies started to talk to me. Well, that was a pretty hopeless conversation because, of course, they speak whatever, and I spoke whatever. So it was clear that when they saw my tangerines and my bread and water in the van, that's what they had their eyes on. And and I had my eyes on one of the ladies had a beautiful earring that is hanging here on my wall today because I traded the earring for oranges and water.
Oh.
And which was one of these things you will never forget. But the other thing was that one of the ladies was pregnant, and I could only make it up that she was pregnant with a truck driver because he kept using the French word camion. And one of the other ladies were just giggling along, and all of a sudden, she reaches under her long dress and grabs with one hand her breast, squeezes it, and the milk is just squirting out into the sand. Of course, I should have taken pictures, but back in the Kodak days where you didn't just shoot 68 pictures of one event. So, but that was just unbelievable. I'll never forget it. And also to run into wild animals in the wild and not in a national park, where you're turning the corner in the savannah somewhere, and there you have 40 giraffes staring down. That again, unbelievable. And by the way, in Niamey, the capital city of Niger, this was, by the way, pretty interesting. There's a museum there, and in that museum, there was one of the bigger rooms had a little stand in the middle of the room, and behind glass was a little piece of rock from the moon. Nixon had given it to the museum or to the country, if you will. And when Nixon was around, and moon landing was a couple of years before that. But there might have been another reason for it, because Niger has a lot of minerals that the United States would really like to get their hands on. So I think we did extra favors for Niger at the time.
That would make sense. And in my much more recent visit, the Chinese were having huge building projects in the capital.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
It's that's a whole different chapter in African history, and it's Mozambique. It's many different places, of course, as well. It's well, that's what's going on today. And as we proceeded down through Dahomey, or Benin, as it's called today, Benin, Togo, Ghana, Ivory Coast, back through Nigeria, Cameroon's Central African Republic, where in the capital city of Bangui, I suddenly found myself driving down a super highway. It turned out to be a retired Air Force base that had converted to a highway. That That was like being back home again, if you will.
Mm.
But the roads and the getting around Africa at the time was fairly easy, I would say. People were very helpful. Don't forget, we are talking about only 10 years after independence. There were a lot of things, a lot of changes that we see today had not taken place. Communication was terrible, of course. You had to go to the post office and hopefully get access to a telephone in order to call anybody anywhere. And communicating was not the easiest. We were robbed for money and ended up at the Danish ambassador's personal residence in Lagos on Crescent Island. I'm sure some people have been there. And camped on the ambassador's lawn for a few days while the ambassador was trying to help out wiring some money down to Lagos.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of different experiences like that. In Zaire, the worst roads, bar none, that I've ever been on. And there, not only did we run into pygmies, we also saw a gorilla on the middle of the road, and
Wow.
some interesting nights. With one night was at the Catholic mission, where as the priest walked out and greeted us, the first thing out of his mouth was, "Any whiskey?" Catholic Church whiskey. Yeah, well, okay. Oh well. Um, we had some bad experiences getting across bridges where it was an inch to the right, an inch to the left, and 2 inches forward in order to make it across the river.
Uh-huh.
Unbelievable experiences that, of course, you still see throughout Africa. But getting into Uganda, Murchison Falls, among other places to see, was just
Mm-hmm.
incredible. And we made a mistake in Uganda, driving at night. Never, 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 ever do that. We had 15 elephants crossing 10 feet in front of us. And I'm sure if we had been in front of them, they would probably just walk right through the vehicle. So stay put at night. That's good advice for travelers in any parts of Africa.
Then you even picked up a stray American woman along the journey, but you end up in Kenya, and I didn't realize you didn't even have the ATC job in hand. You were hoping to secure it at the end of this trip.
That's right. Over in West Africa, this lady from New Jersey was more or less stuck in Africa because the couple she traveled with broke up, and she hitched a ride with me to Nairobi, if you will. Yes, very interesting. And yes, and it took a long time to get the contract. I had to go down to Arusha in Tanzania to get my contract, sign the contract. But first posting was Mombasa. 1 year in Mombasa at 27 years old. Wasn't bad. That was like being on an eternal holiday, eternal vacation. Very nice part of Africa also, and because of the lot of history in Mombasa, as we all know, the Portuguese got there, built Fort Jesus, and built a lot of other things, and the Arabs had traded with East Africa for God knows how many hundreds of years, and still back then in the dhows, the little primitive boats coming out of Saudi Arabia and other parts of the Middle East down to Mombasa, even at that time. At the airport in Mombasa, also had interesting experiences with some unidentifiable airplanes coming in from the Seychelles. We were told, and I'm sure it's true, it was the CIA that operated a base in the satellite tracking station in the Seychelles and flew into Kenya every now and then. The French Air Force came through there. We had a lot of interesting airplanes. An airplane come in one evening, and when it was pulled out of the hangar next morning, delivery, as it's called, the colors, the name and everything on the plane was totally different. And it took off for South Africa. We found out later, because at that time you could not fly between that part of Africa and South Africa because of the apartheid. There were so many exclusions to air traffic. So a lot of people, like today, you always figure out a way to get things done.
Oh, wow. And talk about ATC. I mean, you're in a frontier time for aviation in the continent. Talk about ATC as a career. What does it involve? You might have still continued if you hadn't turned up in the U.S. and they require U.S. citizenship to be an ATC.
Yeah, I know. It was pretty sad. I mean, after having done on-the-job training of local East Africans, and then coming here, and not that I didn't know it, but I thought there was a way around it. You have to be a U.S. citizen in order to do air traffic control. It's an old rule from even way back in the 30s, before Second World War. FBI, air traffic control, several other federal jobs like that, you have to have citizenship. So that certainly made me rethink what should I do. So I applied to Cornell's hotel school, to the thinking that tourism would certainly be an area that is international, just like ATC. So graduated from there in '79 and got right into the travel business, and I've been ever since. Different positions, and ran my own company, a couple of companies, as a matter of fact, and specialized in, at the time, a thing that is now so popular, at least before COVID-19, river cruises in Europe, and covered all of Scandinavia's ferries and the coastal voyage up along the Norwegian coast, etc. So a lot of interesting things at a time also when the USSR fell apart. We opened up, we chartered a Finnish ship and cruised into the Baltic states. We even went up to the White Sea, the Murmansk and Kola Peninsula area in Russia, and cruised into the Solovetsky Islands, one of Stalin's prime concentration camps, if you will. All back in the early 90s, which really made it quite interesting for a lot of university groups that wanted to go, etc. So, being in the travel trade in New York is always not only a challenge, but a lot of fun. I mean, how can you be in a city that has more? You can't be in a city that has more connections worldwide than New York. And going to conferences and doing travel shows around the country, etc. I ended up having slept in all 50 states, and also now having slept in all provinces of Canada, including some provinces, some territories. So being in the business makes you gives you the opportunity, I should say, to do a lot of travel. So one of my trips around by car around Newfoundland and Labrador was extremely interesting. And just 5 years ago, in an old Mercedes diesel, I headed out of here for the Arctic Circle in Alaska, going through all the provinces diagonally across Canada and into the Yukon Territory, and saw the old Alaska Highway built by U.S. Navy, U.S. Army, I should say, back in the 40s. So North America, as much as we are in a situation now where we are certainly limited to traveling, there are plenty of things to see in North America, that's for sure. And
talk about Quebec as a province. I confess I've only been to Montreal, not even Quebec City, and you shared an area I know nothing about, the Gaspé Peninsula.
Yeah, Gaspé Peninsula is right across from Newfoundland, and part of the Quebec province. And the north of the Lawrence River, St. Lawrence River, is a quite a few interesting things. And one that I want to mention is an underground hydroelectric plant, one of the biggest in the world, where you are able as a tourist to go in and tour the plant. It's called the Churchill Falls, and it's
Mm.
the province of Labrador. And to get there, you at the time, 8 years ago now, you went there by dirt road, which is great. It's a great way to travel. Anyway, these turbines are so huge that you literally feel like a small ant standing
Mm.
there at these turbines. I later on met a gentleman from Finland who worked on board a ship that delivered the turbines. I mean, it's a small world, isn't it? These turbines must have come from somewhere in Europe. And Labrador City was, of course, still is, an open mine pit. Unbelievable. Mining everywhere. And then we went down to, I have to just look at my notes here because I can never remember how to say this, Manicouagan. The Manicouagan crater
Mm.
was where a comet hit uh, Canada about 50 million years ago and created a crater that is 40 kilometers in diameter. An incredible experience to see that, where you can canoe and kayak around the area, and just beautiful scenery, and it's just about as quiet as the Sahara Desert.
Incredible. Sharing a picture and link from NASA in the show notes, and if NASA is showing it, it highlights how large and a feature this is.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Remember that. But the let's see here. What was the other thing I wanted to have mentioned to you?
About the peninsula?
Well, the Gaspé.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just beautiful farm country, and little villages with their fishing villages and so on, and of course French spoken throughout, which is very charming. The French, of course, don't think it's French, but
And another giant journey, I think one that provided the Americans are welcome again in Canada is driving. You went all the way from your base to the Arctic Circle across Canada through the Yukon up into Alaska.
yeah, it was a 12,000-mile trip in 7 weeks in a 32-year-old vehicle, and I did have a major expense to I had to replace a light bulb, $8. Repairs for that trip. You can't beat those old cars. But going up through the central part of Canada, I had no idea, but Ukrainians are there in the, I don't want to say millions, but at least in the thousands, farmers, lots of Ukrainians there. And as you get closer up to the Yukon territory, you start to run into to bisons and bears out in the wild. It's a fabulous part of the world. Cross into Alaska. The first town you come to is Chicken, Alaska. We have 7 people live there in the wintertime and about 28 people in the summertime.
Hmm.
They wanted to call the town something else, some rare bird they have up there, but they couldn't agree on how to spell it and how to pronounce it. So they came up with the word chicken. It's okay. Ptarmigan was what they were supposed to be. Yeah, that's right. So, but then getting north of Fairbanks, it's interesting. Diamond mines and oil, of course. You follow the uh, pipeline all the way up to Purdue Bay. I didn't go that far. I just turned around at the Arctic Circle, which was, for that matter, didn't look any different than anywhere else along that road, but at least that was the Arctic Circle. Turn around down to Fairbanks and down to the big park north of Anchorage. Jesus.
Denali?
Pardon me?
Denali?
Denali, thank you. Yes.
Mhm.
And that was interesting in itself, but on the other hand, it was very sad to see that the Park Service had a bunch of old school buses to take you around in, and then as soon as somebody on bus said, "Oh, there's a bear up there," but you could barely see, the whole bus came to a stop. Everybody took pictures, and when they came home and looked at pictures, they couldn't even find the bear on the picture. I mean, it was ridiculous, totally ridiculous. But beautiful day. We saw the Denali, just about the entire mountain, and that is quite a sight. And then headed down back along the entire coastline, all the way down to well, just about down to the central part of the coastline, and then took the ferry, the intercoastal waterway, to the Victoria Island, and then down to the town of Victoria, the capital city of British Columbia, ferry over to Vancouver, up in the Needle, and doing all the wonderful things, having dinner there, and then down to Seattle and across the United States home. What a trip, and a trip that I can only recommend. 7 weeks is a long time, but I slept most of the nights in the car, so that took a little bit of made the trip a little more affordable.
Oh, and you spent a decade with a large tour company, said when you graduated from Cornell, and then in 1989 you set out on your own. Talk about that process, that decision. It's a big step to go build your own business.
Well, it was a hell of a challenge, because shortly after having started the company, we had another problem like we have right now, and we had at 9/11. We had the Gulf War, which suddenly again brought travel to a standstill.
Hmm.
So I'm sure some competitors would like to see that we hadn't made it, but we did. We made it, and we started to really specialize in Scandinavia, anything underwater in Scandinavia and surrounding countries, and then got into with the help of a good friend of mine, got into Rhine River cruises. Mind you,
Mhm.
this is so early on that very few Americans would ever go on a river cruise in Europe, because it was, quite honestly, it was primitive. You had a bathroom down the hallway and so on. But we broke into all of that, and really seemed to develop that quite nicely, including the cruise from St. Petersburg to Moscow, where I remember Arthur Frommer asking me, or simply telling me, "You can't cruise from St. Petersburg to Moscow." But yes, you can. There are canals and lakes, and you can do that. That was right in the beginning of, again, after USSR had fallen apart, that we were able to do something that had never been done before. And that is some of the trademark. We tried always to be, we cruised into to Kaliningrad,
Mm.
of all places, where the guide, a retired captain, welcomed us on board the tour bus, and he said, "Welcome to the cage." That was how he described Kaliningrad, being, being
For,
that
for those in the audience that aren't familiar with Kaliningrad, just encapsulate it in your style.
Russia. Oh, hang on a second here. Somebody's calling me. Okay, I'm back, I think. Am I back?
I know you're also part of the town fire department, so I know you can't totally turn it off.
Yeah, I'm fire police, but that was not a call. That was not a call. Anyway, um, the Kaliningrad, of course, at the time of the USSR, was part of the USSR, as was uh, Lithuania and Belarus, White Russia, Belarus, and Poland, and so forth. But when the USSR fell apart, and suddenly all these countries around them, around Kaliningrad, became independent. They were suddenly sitting there like an enclave, not connected to Mother Russia. So therefore, he called it the cage, because they couldn't get out of there. And it was a beautiful town, beautiful old German town with maybe 10, 15 buildings left. It was it's either demolished by, I got so many things going on here, either demolished by the Russians, or like they did with a beautiful castle in the middle of town, and then replaced it with one of these ugly Russian structures. Or it was, of course, also, and it was, of course, also destroyed by the bombings during Second World War. So, but being in there as the first ship with 140 Americans was quite something. They had never seen an American tourist in Kaliningrad before, and it turned out to be a very good visit that we developed further in the years to come. We also did the White Sea, way up at the Kola Peninsula, where Stalin had one of his biggest concentration camps, gulags, the Solovetsky Islands, where we cruised in, also again with 140 Americans. And it was such a big event in Russia that Radio Russia broadcasted it nationwide, the event of a ship coming into the Solovetsky Islands. So there's been a lot of really interesting things going on in the travel business, with the changes, with geopolitical changes, if you will. With that comes new things new opportunities for tour operators and for tourists alike to go and see. Follow that very closely until, of course, 10 minutes before 9 on 9/11, we're on the way to work. I saw the first plane go in and to the World Trade Center. And later on that same morning, of course, all 12 of us were standing in front of the office and saw the second plane go in, not realizing immediately that that was the end of the travel business for a while. So got into consulting, stuff like that, moved up country, still am, and now back in the business again. I thought I was until January, February hit. So I don't know where the next step is, where we're going from here. That, of course, in this particular case with COVID-19 it's a crucial experience for all of us. So
you mentioned upcountry. So you live in the Hudson River Valley on an apple orchard, and the years I lived in New York, I heard people talk about Hudson River Valley. I never really made a trip. It's so close, yet you get locked into your mindset of I'll go another time. Talk about the tourist charms of the Hudson River Valley.
Yeah, it's lots of rich folks, including presidents, of course, built their mansions along here. And as a matter of fact, last week we just went over to see the railroad baron. What was his name? The famous gentleman that built railroads, and his statue.
Vanderbilt?
No, not Vanderbilt. Somebody out there knows, I'm sure. I can't think of what his name is. You all know who he is. Anyway, so there are so many mansions today that are accessible to the public, and that's one of the many things that I think there's a reason for coming up here. Orchards, apple orchards, pears, all kinds of fruits. We have distilleries, breweries coming up. We have there are just so many things happening. And what of course happening right now is that New Yorkers from New York City are buying land here and moving here. We've never seen anything like it. It's just incredible. But they said there's also skiing going on in the wintertime, and it's just a very pleasant place to be. Within about 60 miles from Manhattan. University is across in Poughkeepsie, and yeah, and this little town is actually right now rebuilding the waterfront, so we will be able to take riverboats, accommodate riverboats to come in here and use this as a starting point for touring the area. So a lot of people are thinking down the road what can be done to attract more tourism, which is interesting.
And speak of that, so I've shared your Great Dane journeys, your travel company, as you before I diverted you to the apple orchard. You were talking of what we all know so intimately of this, in essence, freeze in travel, and now, gentle, tentative opening up for local regional travel, some international, say within Europe, we see starting to happen. What are your thoughts as a business person?
Uh, I happen to be not too optimistic. When I say 2022 or 2023, people are saying, nah, 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 we don't have to wait that long. And I do. I believe we do. If you want to be fairly safe, and well, granted, nobody can predict about anything about this. But I would say that 21, you can write off 21. A lot of domestic travel. I was specializing in the Trans-Siberian Railroad, Moscow to Beijing and vice versa. Mongolia, all of that good stuff. Lake Baikal, fantastic trip. Train trips down in the Silk Road area, as well as in southern Africa. All deluxe train travel. Great market for it. Lots of people want to go, but I have just emptied my bank account, giving the rest of the money back for deposits because people are canceling right, left, and center. And
Mm.
no bookings are coming in at this point. But let's see what happens. As we follow the news every day, I don't know what's going to happen, but it certainly does not look good for being in the business. I just went the on an app today to see transatlantic traffic, how many airplanes are in the air in the middle of the day. Where in the
Mhm.
old you would find 100 airplanes easily. Well, I probably found about 25. So see how even European traffic is way down.
25 is more than I would guess if it's a quarter off the normal day, but that still is a precipitous drop.
Yeah, maybe 100 or something. Probably many more than 100, but at least the Atlantic looks very thin when it comes to.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, I see the planes on approach to SeaTac pass by over Lake Union where I live, and it quite a rare sight now to have the planes. Even the little seaplanes have only started to resume in small measure. Uh, we'll be optimistic in talking about if some things return to as they were at some point. This deluxe train travel. I've taken trains in some countries. I've never approached it beyond I'm getting there and that's the means of travel. So that's practical. Talk about the deluxe aspect.
I also think that when this all started, we said, well, Antarctica is definitely a place where there's no COVID-19. You had to get to Ushuaia in order to board the ship. And
Mhm.
it doesn't look good for any cruises to Antarctica right now. So even there, nothing is going on. I might have
Mhm.
to mention, though, that in February of this year, I took a group to Svalbard, way up, the northernmost settlement in the world,
Mhm. Mhm.
Norwegian territory. And we had just a fabulous time. Why did we go there in February? Because we wanted to see the first little peak of the sun coming out after having disappeared for 93 days. And sure enough, we saw the sun, and it was an incredible experience going into ice caves and dog sledding and all kinds of stuff in real winter, I might also add. It was cold.
Mm.
And I'm planning on doing that this coming February. Whether it's going to happen, I have no idea. But Svalbard is interesting. A relatively new destination, and certainly in the cruise business, a lot of people go there. This was merely a land package where we flew straight in and did our thing. So Svalbard is quite a destination.
Well, why don't we close with that bit of optimism and one bit of advice. So EPS travelers are very solo, independent, difficult, even stubborn, know what they want. There are times where it makes sense to work with tour agents. There's government requirements, there's logistics, there's expertise we don't have, even if we won't admit it to ourselves. How can we be good customers to travel agents? Because I know I've not been.
First of all, listen to them. They have access to information. They know a lot of things that going on around the world, and I would say don't discount what a travel agent or tour operator tells you, because they want your business, but they also want to be very careful and not misleading you. So I think you're going to be in very good hands. I realize that a lot of consumers do a lot of excellent research and come up with all kinds of places to go and things to do, which of course is admirable, no question about that. However, uh, there are still lots of information out there, as I said, that the industry can be helpful with.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today, Vijay.
My pleasure. Good to see you.